welcome. I'm bringing Brooklyn in the house. Come on in.
Okay, cameras are speeding.
I started this show in 2009 with Brooklyn Savvy set in different living rooms. So the best way to celebrate 20 seasons is to bring it home, literally.
I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy.
Leading from compassion and kindness is so important. We just don't know what journeys others are on. People can be so cruel when others are different. So why do we judge? The first encounter that I had with a transgender was in the workplace, and it was a male transitioning to a female. And I remember just wondering what was going on inside of him to want to change his sex, so to speak. But it was interesting to witness how he was received. The women in the company felt that it became a bathroom issue, that, you know, this person should not be in the female bathroom. But for some reason, I didn't lean into that. I more leaned into those that I saw were compassionate. This person was very engaged in dealing with customers on the telephone and also being involved when we had emergency responses. And I really saw a group of people treating others with respect and compassion. And I love that. And that signals to Jodie Patterson. She's a mother of 2 non-gender conforming children. And she's going to share her story and how she leans into them so lovingly. So when it comes to gender fluidity, talk to us about what that means.
Well, the language is trying to catch up with the reality of life. And unfortunately, we've wanted it to be, we've packaged life in one of 2 options. You're either male or female. But the reality is that's just not even scraping anything close to what the reality is. So even adding the X is a step forward, but that's not even enough. And so when we think about gender fluidity, we have to think about unlimited options. I know that's hard to understand because we think of identity as stiff, as non-flexible, as either male or female. But in reality, when we're looking at, and we're not talking about sexual orientation, we're not talking about the way the body looks, we're talking about identity, which starts in the brain. There are endless ways that we identify, and that's scientifically proven. I know that's hard to grasp, but it's scientifically proven that your body can look one way and you can identify another way. And not just how we feel, but how we actually are.
So therefore, you know, we can be born a woman, and anatomically speaking, or a female.
I would even say that differently.
All right, please.
I would say that your body can have certain physical attributes, and we can identify in any way. So I might have the physical body, a person might have my physical body and identify differently than I do. So I don't really say I was this and then I changed to that, or the doctors made me into, or I did some magic and I'm now. I think that, and I'm raising 5 children, 2 of them are gender non-conforming. And
that basically means?
That we don't conform, that they don't conform to the dominant culture's understanding that there's only a natural way to be cisgender. Right? The dominant culture said we should be cisgender, and that's how it is.
And cisgender means that whatever my body says is what.
So the way the doctors have given you an identity when you're born, and you agree with that. That is cis, as in same. Transgender is you're given an identity when you are born, and you feel different from that. You are different from that. You see yourself as different from that.
But no matter how you feel, you're feeling like a gender, right? I mean, you're feeling either that you're male or female, or I mean, that's
I
a
don't know.
question.
Are
That's
you?
a question. I'm
Well,
just asking a question, right?
yeah.
Right?
Do we know who we are is the question? I think we do.
Right.
I think we do know who we are. And I think some people say I am, some people know themselves to be male, some people know themselves to be female, some people know themselves to be fluid between those.
Right.
And is that considered binary or no?
Binary is one of two choices. You're
Oh,
either
I
male
see.
or female.
Oh, okay.
Non-binary is,
That's what
can't-
I meant,
yeah,
non-binary.
non-binary, exactly. So, and the language is so complex, and if you want to geek out on it, you can just Google, LGBTQIA plus language, and you'll see this incredible new dictionary. Many of us aren't familiar with it, but if you are excited about a challenge, Google it, because there's language that we still don't know, and we should know it because our children know it.
In our conversation, though, we talked about how this is not new.
Nope. I
So
heard
talk
that.
about that just a bit.
Well, I mean, you can look all over the world and see gender non-conforming, transgender folks in Africa, in Asia, in Native America, in Central America, and they've always been there, in Hawaii. And much of the gender non-conforming communities have been seen as highly spiritual. It is of recent phenomenon in terms of the history of the world where we've said that they're dangerous and unnatural. But a lot of places from the beginning of time have said they have a higher understanding or closer understanding to a spiritual existence.
Like the two-spirit.
The two-spirit, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've decided, because of capitalism and because of white supremacy, that we have to be packaged as one of two things: dominant culture or other, white or other, male or other, right? And everything that doesn't hit the dominant culture, cisgender, male, and wealthy, is in the other category. But in reality, there's just so much more diversity in all of nature.
That's interesting.
And humans are nature. We've decided that we want to be above and beyond nature, but we are really a part of the natural way. And if you look at trees and oceans and birds and animals, you can't describe them with one of two choices. There's a complexity to the ocean. And I like to think of that as a simple way of understanding the complexity of humans. Now, if you ask me to give you the science behind why I am cisgender and my child is transgender, I couldn't tell you, but it doesn't matter.
And that's one thing I wanted to dig into. You have a child that is transgender. I'd love for you to share how you approached it, because I'm very appalled by the suicide rates of people who are transgender, and I really think that needs to stop. And I'm also appalled by folks that feel they're going to throw their kids out the house because they're having identity crisis.
Right.
So if you could talk about, because I thought you managed this so lovingly and from such a spiritually grounded place, if you could speak to us about that journey, that part of your journey.
You know, my parents are Southern. My mother's Southern. I was raised in New York City, so I have a bit of New York native in me, and then I have some Southern ways as well. I was raised by Southern activists, people who changed laws, people who changed culture. My grandmother was known as Ms. Revolution.
And you went to Spelman.
And I went to Spelman, right? So we're going to do something
That gives
important
you cred.
here.
You got cred.
And my uncle was Gil Scott Heron, so I understand change.
That meant in the bottle.
Right. I understand change, but then when my child said to me, "I'm not a girl, I'm a boy," that change scared me. So I understand, like, it's not something that we grasp easily. But, you know, when you're faced with life or death, when your child says, "I don't want to live," for me it was an immediate switch. Oh, I can change my language to keep my kid alive. I can actually learn pronouns to keep my kid alive. I can shift the way I treat this person to keep my child alive. So I have essentially the same person I birthed, but I use a different language to match him. So I've learned the intricacies of pronouns. I have accepted that he will present and dress however he chooses. And I then have taken it a step further and said, I'll teach the world as well, because laws have to change. You know, housing laws and healthcare laws and education laws, and because we're still in the mode of different is dangerous.
I'm looking at this show right now, and then you ladies please jump in. I'm looking at this show right now where this young man, born a female gender, now he's trans, he's taking all of these hormone shots. what is the role of hormones in this? Meaning, I mean, he's taking testosterone so that he bulked up. Can you talk to us about that at all?
Sure. So I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, right. That's why when I asked that, I said she's not a doctor.
No, but I can speak to my understanding of it and to my take on it. One, I think that when I first started off, I was nervous around. So as parents of trans people, we fast forward 20 years.
You have to, because there's such a thing called puberty.
And we're thinking like, not even just in this moment, but what happens 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. And some of that makes you so scared you can't even move. So I had to take a deep breath and say, okay, we're gonna do this one bit at a time. And the things that would have normally freaked me out, I'm not gonna let them freak me out. I'm gonna problem solve around this. I'm gonna take a Malcolm Gladwell approach and study it. So I started studying real early, 10,000 hours, right? You know, the things that scare me don't scare me as much. Hormone therapy does not make me nervous anymore. So we have testosterone, we have estrogen in our bodies naturally. We are using that to allow our children and our adults, our young adults, to present in this world the way they see themselves. And some trans folk don't do any hormone therapy, and some trans folk do. It depends on the individual, but I think what we have to remember is these aren't drugs.
Right.
We're not injecting drugs. I used to think of it as like drugs. These are hormones that can help save a life. They don't do harm to the individual, and they don't do harm to the community. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're policing trans bodies, because this same therapy has been used on cisgender people. We've done you know, hormone therapy with cis people like you and me. We've done puberty blockers for cis girls who had premature periods. And no one ever batted an eye. But when trans folk are doing it, we are policing them and saying it's unnatural and it's dangerous and we don't want to use our money for this or something. So the question is, why are we policing trans people in a different way than we are cisgender people?
This is so, you're reminding me, I don't remember the name of the athlete, and I'm sure there are many athletes, right? There was a swimmer who was trans, male to female, and there was an uproar about her winning. You know what I'm talking about? I don't, so yeah.
Yes, I remember, because
this was really interesting. Because
she had an advantage because
they were saying that
she had shoulders.
She had an advantage because of her male genetics. But then they were saying that they measured her
this is so interesting, right?
hormones to ensure that whatever those levels were comparable to a woman, which I believe they were. But I'd love to get your perspective on this.
I think that there's this hysteria around trans folk and around black folk and around women folk. There's hysteria. And so much of what the media talks about is actually just not true. It's just not a thing, that there's this huge advantage that trans people have over cisgender people have in sports. So for example, the study actually proves that the advantage is minuscule. It's like if your parents had extra money to give you an extra coach, you'd have an advantage. If you have enough money for great, healthy food, that's the equivalent of the advantage that we're talking about. And so and most trans folk who want to play sports, let's talk about the hundreds of thousands of children that want to play with their friends. They're just trying to play sports. They're just trying to play. They're trying to have a good time with their friends, and they're trying to have sportsmanship. They're not trying to dominate the world or take anything from just cisgender people. So I think the hysteria is something that we have to ask ourselves. Do I know any trans people? Do I know the humanity of a trans person? So before I start thinking about laws and regulations, do I know this group of people as individuals?
Jennifer Long was the first transgender guest we had on the show. What makes her story interesting is she was living a testosterone-fueled life. So I wanted to unpack that shift.
So, talk to us first about what it means to be transgender.
Well, when people often refer to the term transgender, and some people often refer back to a transvestite or an older comparison. It's just when what really the core of it is one's gender doesn't align with their physical being. So, you may have been born a female, you may have been born male, but that's not how you identify.
That's not how you feel inside?
It's a core feeling. And often, the one question people ask me is, when did you know you were trans, right? So, I'm going to ask you, when did you first know you were a woman?
I was born knowing it.
You were born knowing it.
I was born knowing I was
when did
female.
you
say cycle, like
Yeah,
when you,
3 years
woman
old.
versus girl, right?
Yeah, so
there's-
you're like, when did you first feel like you were female or a woman?
When that magical time came, that wasn't so magical.
No, I just always felt I was a girl.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
it's almost the same core as me. Only I grew up in a different time. I was born in 1964, so it's like
Well,
there
not
was
that
no-
different. But anyway.
So you think about it, right? It was pre-internet, it's like the prehistoric times, right? So there was no information. There was no
Rotary
talking. Even if
phones.
you were gay, you couldn't come out and talk about it.
Right, absolutely.
So there was a
It was
lot
real
of
taboo.
stigma.
Right.
There was a lot of stigma. It was often cloaked and hidden and everything. So there wasn't really, and it was just like people would act out, they'd go to clubs or whatever, but there was no real living as your authentic self. And really in the last few years, so much has happened that allows so many of us to live our authentic selves, not just late in life, but more importantly at a younger age. Just seeing more parents supporting and identifying with their children at a younger age, which creates such a stable child.
My question, though, is if you felt as though you were female, why the Army? Meaning, only because back in the 60s, the Army, that was G.I. Joe time. So why did you choose to go that direction?
It's
And then
interesting-
stay for 30 years.
Yeah, I know, right? It was the
And then
house-
get married twice.
I know, it was the house that never left.
Let's put it all out there.
I call it was the love-hate relationship. But why I joined, right? My family had a military history, but I joined in particular as an assertion or a flight to hypermasculinity. I mean, there's been studies done by the Palm Center and different groups that have realized per capita there are more trans people in the military than in
Interesting.
society.
So fascinating.
And interesting, and if you drill down even further from that, it goes down even into the space where most of them gravitate to high energy jobs, special operations, Navy SEALs, pilots. So they gravitate to these high end jobs because it's that assertion to masculinity. And I did it. I did all those things. I've jumped out of airplanes. I'm a diver. I've been, been in special warfare. I've trained foreign armies, and I've got 4 combat deployments. I've been, in Desert Storm. I led a 6-man reconnaissance team deep into Iraq to gather intelligence and call in airstrikes. I worked in a prison in Guantanamo.
Wow.
I
hate to say that, but you sound real macho. Yeah.
So, and then I was the chief of security, 3rd largest base of Iraq. And my last tour was in Afghanistan as a combat advisor, which is on the cusp of special operations. And my job was to liaise with the French and work on the Afghan police in the northern province of Kapisa in the Hindu Kush mountain range. So, I've had all these hyper-masculine jobs, and it was all in that assertion. In the end, I wound up right where I started.
Although it's an interesting thought. So, would it is the suggestion that a woman could not have performed those jobs?
No, not because
I guess I made the comment.
But it's interesting when we think about this, right? So that sense.
But we're not socialized to want to perform those kinds of jobs. At least back when I was a kid in the 60s,
you don't want to
there
eat
was
dirt.
absolutely no one that was saying, Toni, you join the Army and jump out of an airplane.
Because it's not socially
Absolutely
accepted.
not. Absolutely not.
So, but it's not about the capability or the ability. It's about this.
The mental
this
conditioning
perception,
and the social.
the lack of social
I'll give you,
acceptance.
to put it in perspective for you, right? In the early part of my career, I was very masculine, right? But then my latter part of my career, particularly Afghanistan, I was already on hormones.
When not to interrupt, but
Sure,
when
go.
did you make that? When did you decide to make the transition?
Okay. When I was sent to Iraq, when I was in that time period, right before that time period before that, I had a boyfriend. We were together for about 18 months. Life was great. And it was a lot of new firsts for me, right? I never dated men before. I'd never been with anyone like that. It was I was discovering myself. And in that, you know, I went to Iraq and we separated. And then it was a decision because what am I doing? Because it started to feel as though it was like self-destructive, right? I'm at this point living two very different lives, right? You know, in the daytime, I'm this soldier and I have to be this one person. But other than that, I'm Jennifer, right? So Ed's going out, to slay the dragon so Jennifer can have a soft place to be. And I decided, I started a journal in Iraq, and particularly to find out what I was doing. And I struggled in the beginning in writing it because I asked myself one hard question, you know, and the question really came down to that could I, that I couldn't not do it, right? So it was either do it or don't do it, but you know, and then you try to find all these reasons, but what happened was I had to come out to myself.
Or compelled, and you
Right.
felt that energy within
Yes.
to do.
So you feel it like all of a sudden you find that strength inside to say, yes, this is me. And I
That's
have
some
to do
real
this.
strength too, right? Because everyone, how does family and those that you're close to relate to you're making that decision?
At first, nobody knew. It was a private decision. You know, and you just try to, and you try to figure out how you're going to take the steps, because once I made the decision to do it, then it became how, right? And being the good military planner that I was, I planned my own little transition, like a little military operation. But I started with the end in mind.
Very good.
And I started saying, well, who's Jennifer going to be when this is over, right? So
Right? That must have really been scary.
well, think about it, right? You wake up, you can sit here. I have this moment in life, and you put out a piece of paper, and you write Jennifer on it, and who is Jennifer? I could be anybody, right? I could do any work. I can go anywhere. I'm brand new.
Brand new.
So who am I going to be?
Brand new.
Yeah.
So, and who am I going to be?
Right.
What am I going to do for work? Where am I going to live? What's my life going to be like? So you start to discover, yourself, because now you have to do a lot of introspection and saying, who am I going to be? What's my life going to be like? What do I envision my life to be? And how am I going to, what steps am I going to take to get there? And it's a long process. It's like some people think, when you transition, it's something that happens rapidly.
No way.
You start
It's like
hormones.
anything. Right.
You start hormones, and with the beginning of hormones, what the chemical reaction that happens is there's two drugs you take from going from male to female, and one in particular is what they call an androgen. And it's a suppressor.
male, yeah.
And what that does is it suppresses the testosterone, right? So you push that down, and then you introduce estrogen. So once that hits your body and you start to lower that testosterone amount, you kick your body into a second puberty. So now you're a grown adult, and you're now a teenage girl on hormones, crazy for hormones. Only at 40 years old. So you run around the house, you're happy, and then you're crying over something else. And then, you're just witchy, bitchy, everything else. But you're going through all this, right? But as that process happens, your body physically starts to change. Your skin starts to change. Breast growth happens. The physical parts of your body change. And it's interesting because as that happens, my facial structure changed. If you look at pictures from before, you see me now, it's like you look and see the facial structures have changed. And then your body starts to change, and your
How about
mindset
your thoughts?
changes.
Yeah,
Yes.
how about the thoughts? Right.
You become more emotional, and you're
Interesting. So, is that something that we females are? We're more emotional?
It has to do with our hormones.
Yeah, right.
So I'm more nurturing, and also I do feel more emotional about things.
So he's speaking of hormones as opposed to socialization.
Or is
Right.
there
Or is
another
there
lens
both?
that it's a greater or heightened awareness of your emotions? And
It could be
nurturing
both,
things?
and it's
That's
both
true.
because you're in a space now that's completely unfamiliar. Although you feel it in your heart, I was socialized as a man, so I always like to tell the story of what it's like in a world, because you always hear about bathrooms, right? And I always say in the best interest I can tell you, what socially the change is when men's rooms and ladies. You go to men's room, no talking, right? We go to the
Right.
door. Two guys go to the door. We go in the door. No talking. We go to the urinals. We stand there one apart. There's always one in the middle. Never stand together. And do your business. Look at the wall. Wow. Come back to the
Sounds serious.
Serious. No talking.
Of course.
And then when you go, you can wash your hands. Some conversation is permitted, and then you leave. Then you can talk again. However, in the ladies' room,
You never get out.
there is no talking outside. All conversations are inside. Like when I walked in today, it was like. So, and when you get socialized, it's a terrifying
So you
fact.
have two vantage points in a lot of ways.
I do.
Okay.
I've been privileged to see the world from two different perspectives,
Right.
in two different ways, and it's given me a deep appreciation for life and and for being a woman.
When did you really, I mean, Jennifer's a name, Ed's a name, but when did you really feel like, I'm Jennifer? What was that defining moment for you?
If I had to say what would be a defining moment, is the very first time I went out as Jennifer, and I went out. I came to New York City, and it took me forever to get dressed. Then it took me forever to get out of the house. I would have rather jumped out of an airplane in the dark than tried to turn that doorknob and get out.
Story of our lives.
Right? So I go downstairs, I make it to the car, I make it to my car, I get to New York City, then I can't get out of my car because I'm too scared, right? Then I finally get out and I walk down the street, and, and this feeling is just, that I'm outside in public as Jennifer. And then I went to this little club where a lot of trans folks met. And I walked in, and I sat at the bar, and someone came up to me and says, "Hi," and introduced themselves. And I said, "Hi, I'm Jennifer."
Oh,
Wow.
And I never said that name to someone to their face. So if I had to say what moment did I become Jennifer, I would have to say the moment I said my name aloud to someone else, and they said, "Hey, Jennifer, let me introduce you around." And the next thing you know, you're like, you now are a person, and a lot of the feelings and things that I stuffed now started to come up because I never let it flourish. I spent more time trying to suppress it that you don't really understand until you open it up and just let it be.
It's my hope that listening to Jennifer Long's struggles helps to build the compassion and understanding muscle we need in this world. I want you to fully grasp the difficulties of people who identify as transgender. Be kind, be true, be savvy. Do the deep listening. That's the first step. Until the next time, Brooklyn.